3.5 years, and basically I've worked almost a lifetime in mine action the last 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Pehr. Should we go on to Fadwa?
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Fadwa Benmbarek here. I'm the program manager for UNMAS DRC. I've been in mine action for about 7.5 years, and before coming to DRC, I was in Iraq, so I had the pleasure to work with Pehr before joining in DRC. Over.
Thank you, Fadwa. And should we move on to Hamza? I see you.
Yeah, thank you, Clara. Hi, my name is Hamza. I'm an ambassador for Sustainable Development Goal for the UNA Sweden. I'm also active member in the UNA Sweden. I'm purely interested in the landmine issues. Yes.
Thank you, Hamza. And Anita?
Yeah, hello guys. So my name is Anita, and I'm also one of Sweden's UNA's Young Ambassadors for the Global Goals. And I'm also the president of a local association here in Sweden. And I'm also very interested in the whole demining discussion and the problems surrounding that question.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Anita. So with that, I think we're gonna move on to Fadwa's presentation. So I'm gonna let you share your screen, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, just tell me if you could see my screen. I'm not the best with technology.
We can see it. It looks good.
Okay, awesome, great. Yes, thank you very much actually for inviting me for this this webinar, and also I'm really happy and pleased to see so many people interested in this issue that is not only affecting DRC but so many other countries in the world. So I will first start, since I'm the first one to present, and many of us on this call may not know what we do as UNMAS. I just wanted to give you briefly an overview of what we do before I dive into the DRC and the questions that Hamza and Anita have sent us as well. So UNMAS, UN Mine Action Services, an action-oriented UN entity, so very operationally oriented. We're the UN expert entity on explosive hazard threat mitigation, management, and response. UNMAS is also the UN system coordinator for mine action. We have two main areas of operation. Firstly, we deploy humanitarian mine action as per General Assembly mandate and the request of various authorities. Secondly, UNMAS is a service provider and is an integrated component of peace operations as per Security Council resolution mandates. In humanitarian context, UNMAS responds to a range of humanitarian mine action requests through the UN Voluntary Trust Fund for Mine Action. UNMAS implements bilaterally funded humanitarian mine action projects. Countries such as Sweden have generously given to the VTF for mine action. And in countries where peace operations are deployed, UNMAS projects complement the mission, the UN mission capability and direct support mandate implementation. In case of peacekeeping operations like we have here in DRC, there's called MONUSCO, and special political missions such as Afghanistan or Iraq. UNMAS is a critical mission enabler, operating in extremely dangerous, often remote and hostile environment where asymmetric threats against UN personnel has become the new norm, unfortunately. And not just the UN personnel, all humanitarian personnel, frankly. UNMAS expertise and experience in dealing with these threats improve the mission's preparedness and delivery on core mandated tasks such as protection of civilian, reduction of armed violence, stabilization, national capacity building, and so on. UNMAS also provides technical advice on the safe storage and management of weapon and ammunition, and has an expertise and operational capacity to support the disarmament and reintegration processes of ex-combatants and the security sector reform initiatives, and as well as implementation of arms embargoes. In a nutshell, UNMAS enhances mobility and access and provides the condition to maintain the political space required to secure peace dividends and ultimately allow a sustainable peace to take hold. So really, mine action definitely is more than mines, especially now in this time of, in our current times. We have explosive remnants of war, cluster munition, IEDs that Pehr will discuss more about, but they all indiscriminately kill men, women, children, humanitarian personnel, UN personnel, and peacekeepers. The volume of the new explosive remnant of war and contamination and the use of IEDs is on the rise, unfortunately, and that includes in populated urban areas such as Gaza, Syria, and Iraq. You have there the 5 main pillar of activities that UNMAS has, or Mine Action has. So we have survey and clearance that we will speak a lot more today about. Risk education, stockpile destruction, including weapon and ammunition management. So that's state-held weapon and ammunition. Advocacy, of course, and victim assistance. But now moving on to the DRC. I would like to give you a bit of context on the explosive threat in the DRC. As you know, the DRC has, since its independence, undergone significant political turmoil resulting in landmine, explosive remnant of war, unexploded ordnance contamination, particularly in the eastern region of the country. So you could see in the map the striked areas in blue, and the small red triangles, they demonstrate where most of that contamination is at the moment. As shown also on the map, the displaced population are particularly affected in the provinces of North Kivu, South Kivu, Tanganyika, and Ituri. The contamination not only affects the safety, access to social services, and livelihood of civilian population, but also of the UN and humanitarian community aiming to support the civilian population, sorry. However, one positive aspect is the fact that despite all these, the DRC is close to be compliant with the Ottawa Convention. It has submitted last week an extension request for an additional 2 years. Can you, I'm not sure if you could hear me. Okay. So I hope you can, because there was a small glitch. So yes, I was saying, okay, great. So last week, the government of the DRC have submitted an extension request for an additional 2 years to clear all the landmines in the country. It requires only about $2 million to finish the job. It would be a great milestone for the DRC. And of course, I would like to use my position right now to also call on Sweden and other supportive nations to continue to support the DRC in this endeavor. However, it's important to note that as long as the conflict continues, even if we remove all the landmines in this country, the explosive remnant of war contamination will remain. And beyond clearance, there's a need for solution for the conflict to end. Okay, so as you are aware, the government of DRC does not currently have sufficient capacity and resources to effectively respond to all the alerts of explosive remnant of war, and the number of people exposed to the explosive remnant of war contamination remains quite high due to the ongoing conflict and displacement of people. That being said, there has been an independent strategic review done in 2019 of the UN peacekeeping mission called the MONUSCO, in which we are part of. And it's expected that the MONUSCO withdraws for the DRC in the next 3-5 years. Of course, meeting a number of benchmarks before doing so. And it is crucial as part of the strategic disengagement of the DRC, if we could put it in these terms, that we ensure that there's an adequate explosive ordnance disposal and demining national capacity in place before we leave. At the moment, apart from UNMAS, there's only one other international NGO, Dan Church Aid, that is operating in demining in the country. And as I mentioned earlier, the government of the DRC is still heavily reliant on this international support provided by UNMAS and this NGO to continue to clear. You could see on the slide some of the stats of what we've just accomplished in the last fiscal year. You know, you may compare with other countries on the numbers; they may seem low, but it's important to note that even if these numbers are lower than other, in comparison to other new countries that are facing new type of contamination, is that for every explosive hazard that is present is preventing people from living their life and livelihood safely, getting their livelihood safely. Something important to note actually is that we aim, UNMAS aims to nationalize all its operation as much as possible, and we're slowly drawing down the use of international contractor to hire and mentor on-the-job accredited national demining NGOs. So this is part of our strategy, but also not only to have national NGOs to take over the demining, but also national authorities to take that on as much as possible. But so far, this process has shown some success. Just would like to talk a bit about the partnership that we had with UNA Sweden. So, UNMAS in the DRC received funding in 2016 up to 2018 from UNA Sweden for humanitarian mine action activities. The main goal was to raise awareness, of course, and promoting the safe behavior to reduce the threat posed by weapons and explosive hazard in the civilian population. And we could say in the last report of the last year of the UNA Sweden contribution report, about 200,000 people, civilian, have benefited from risk education from the funding received by Sweden. So the risk education sessions were one of the main humanitarian mine action activities. Beyond clearance, this is something that is very important to complement, because we cannot remove all the threats. Therefore, the civilian population need to be aware of how to protect itself from the dangers posed by the explosive hazard. What you see here is in April 2018, the local population of Kananga, which is the capital of Kasai Central province, so really in the center of the country, alerted UNMAS of the presence of unexploded devices in an agricultural field, which had put farmers and their families at risk. Residents were able to recognize the device after taking part in an RE session that has been carried out in the area just a week prior. And thanks to the contribution of UNA Sweden, UNMAS could immediately deploy a technical team to assess the extent of the contamination. After confirming the presence of the explosive, UNMAS marked the contaminated area and conducted another risk education session to all the members of the local community. The threat posed by weapons and explosive hazard to the affected communities in the DRC, particularly in the area, were reduced as a result of that action. Something that was quite innovative and interesting that UNMAS has done, that's back in 2018, using also with UNA Sweden funds, is the launch of awareness radio campaigns to sensitize communities on the risk posed by the explosive hazard in the provinces of Ituri, South Kivu, and Tanganyika in particular. So UNMAS worked closely with local comedians and actors to elaborate a clear and comprehensive script in the local languages of each of these provinces. The messaging has been transmitted in a form of a conversation and also a memorable awareness jingle, a bit like a short song that everybody could remember. This campaign was also an important opportunity for UNMAS to inform the communities about its free hotline in the DRC and how to report any incidents or presence or suspected presence of explosive hazards. Beyond that, and these are just for your information, the hotline number that I mentioned in 2018. During that same period, about 100 calls a day were received by local communities, either requesting for more information or reporting suspicious devices. And this is very important for us because it enables us to prioritize alerts and to put us in a better position to respond through non-technical surveys, but also assessing the extent of the contamination prior to clearing the hazardous areas. The DRC is a very large country, and there's not a lot of paved road across the country except the major axis, which sometimes results in taking days before you get from a place to another if you're taking the road. So these alerts are really important for us to be able to prioritize and send the teams in the places where the most risks are, or the most important needs are, mainly. This is just an example of awareness raising material that was prepared with the support of UNA Sweden. Children in particular are often the most at risk to explosive dangers. And through the support, there's a number of children that received risk education and awareness material at the beginning of their school year to prevent risk accidents due to explosives. So really, in a nutshell, when we're talking about the UNMAS and UNA Sweden partnership in the DRC, it really enabled UNMAS to implement activities that are falling under the main priorities that UNMAS and the UN has for the DRC, which is the protection of civilians. By mitigating the threat posed by the explosive hazard to civilians, either through clearance, either through risk education, but also contributing to the security and stabilization of the country. And in terms of support to the government of the DRC, supporting their endeavor to store and safely store weapons and ammunition, state-held weapons and ammunition, to avoid misappropriation, theft, and misuse. And another deep subject in mine action as well is the proliferation of small arm and light weapon that we're also supporting the government on, not supporting on proliferation, but to prevent the proliferation. And this is something that in the DRC is quite unfortunately common. So in terms of the way forward for us as UNMAS in the DRC, we're really continuing to work towards these following strategic outcome. And I said 3 years because our strategy is for 3 years in the DRC as UNMAS DRC, but also the MONUSCO, the mission, as it's looking and drawing down its presence. But definitely continuing to support the security, government security sector and national NGOs to respond to the EOD threat, the explosive ordnance threats, supporting MONUSCO throughout its activities in addressing these threats, but also, as I mentioned earlier, continuing to support the security institution to effectively manage and secure their weapon and ammunition stockpiles. But one very important question that was asked, and it's true for the DRC, but I would say it's true for the whole world. What we need to make the DRC mine-free? And now I'm being a bit more, giving a bit more my opinion on this one. In a way, with a number of international NGOs leaving and a dramatic reduction of funding for a protracted humanitarian, political, and stabilization crisis in the DRC, we're a bit abandoning the country at a crucial point where it's so close to get past the finish line. And that could be a very important milestone for the DRC to achieve a treaty compliance, but also it would be an opportunity to show a success story of a country that has been through so much conflict yet in partnership, long-standing partnership with the international community, with long-standing commitment, we would be able to solve part of the problems of the DRC, mainly focus on the security, safety, and well-beings of the civilians. And really what it takes really is commitment from the national authorities. So the mine action is the responsibility of the country where we work in. It's their first responsibility. They may need support from the UN or the NGO community or humanitarian community, but it's their primary responsibility. The humanitarian mine action community definitely need to continue to be committed to support the DRC, but the rest, and I would say this same for the rest of the world, and I'm calling really the donor community to continue to support this. It's an enabling activity for so many other humanitarian and development activities, but the civil society is often a group of stakeholders that we don't hear as much from when it comes to advocating for any country, or in this case, the DRC, to be mine-free. And it's important to hear those voices, to advocate at the highest level for investments, not only, when I say it's not only financial, but it's human and material, and it's the time that is required to do clearance of landmines. It cannot happen over a few months. Sometimes it takes years for a reason. It's a very precise work that requires a lot of patience. But I think that through those continued commitment from all these main stakeholders, really, it's something that we could definitely achieve in the DRC in the 2 years time frame, but possibly in other countries as well. So thank you. If you have any questions, happy to answer them as well. Because I'm not very good at technology, I will stop sharing my screen so I could see also your questions, if any.
Thank you so much, Fadwa. That was super interesting and really interesting to hear, like, directly from you about the impact of Project Mines that we have here at UNA Sweden. I think we're gonna move on, and if you have questions to Fadwa, write them in the chat, and then Jens will pick them up and ask them to Fadwa in the end. So we'll move over to Pehr, who has now shared his screen. So now we'll look closer at the situation in Iraq, which is the area of UNMAS operations that he oversees. So you're welcome, Pehr.
All right, thank you very much for that, Clara, and very interesting also to listen to Fadwa's presentation, since I was actually in the DRC before I arrived in Iraq almost 3.5 years ago. So thank you for that. And thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much to the government of Sweden for the generous contribution we had towards our program in Iraq. And I will speak briefly about, for the next 15 minutes or so, about the UNMAS Iraq program. And I will focus very much on the Iraqi landscape and the new types of explosive ordnance contamination that we see in Iraq. And basically, looking at the first slide here, looking from left, these are pictures from, it's a picture from our operation in Sinjar, where last year we had mixed teams with Yazidis working, men and women side by side, in those teams. The picture in the middle is from risk education activities, and the last one is from clearance activities. It's a searcher doing marking, and he's used his metal detector there. Iraq is complicated because we've had a number of conflicts in Iraq, and the latest conflict only brought another layer of contamination, really, that now remains, at least in part, uncleared. Fadwa was kind enough to talk about UNMAS and what we stand for, what we have done, where we operate, etc. So I won't elaborate on that, but basically you can see that we're working currently in 19 different countries. We work clearance, mine risk education, victim assistance, advocacy, stockpile destruction, and Iraq is only one of the many countries where we are operating. But moving on to Iraq again, and I could talk about Iraq for days probably. So again, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible and give you space for questions in the end also. So Iraq has basically been in a continuous state of conflict for the last 3 decades, beginning in 79 with the Iran-Iraq war, until recently with the latest conflict to liberate areas, the 32 liberated areas that we talk about from ISIL control. And all of these years of conflict has contributed to layers of explosive ordnance contamination. And I prefer to talk about layers because we have one layer from the Iran-Iraq war, mainly along the border between Iran and Iraq. We have 2 layers in the south from the 2 Gulf wars, ammunition fire that failed to function from both sides, American coalition side and Iraqi side, from internal conflict in northern Iraq with a multitude of minefields. And now the latest contamination that I will focus on from ISIS. And this contamination, it's very, very different from what we've seen in the past. When you see films, when you see movies, etc., you see bombs and grenades and you recognize them. This new contamination you don't recognize because it's made from anything that you can find in a hardware store, down to the explosives. ISIS had what I call evil genius. They manufactured everything themselves, from rockets, artillery shells, hand grenades, pressure plate devices, anti-lift devices, passive infrared devices, etc. And they even made the explosives themselves. They were using fertilizer, which is ammonium nitrate, mixed with aluminium powder to make the explosive component. And this we see throughout the 32 liberated areas. So like I said, much of the contamination, it's improvised explosive devices. They're homemade, easily camouflaged, they're lethal, and we find them very often in urban environments. And I would also say that ISIL engaged in what I would call a new type of warfare, where they left thousands of improvised explosive devices to ensure that people could not return to their places of origin, and also to make sure that people could not make use of the infrastructure that was present across the liberated areas, and especially in places like Mosul. ISIL also did not only use improvised explosive areas along roads, agricultural areas, grazing areas, but also in residential areas. And this really was new for us. Normally, I talk about mine action and mine clearance as a two-dimensional problem. You clear a field from landmines, you remove them, you mark the areas, and it's cleared. And people can return, people can do grazing, they can do agricultural activities. But when we went into Mosul almost 3 years ago now, what we found there was completely different. All of a sudden, we were exposed to improvised explosive devices in residential areas, in an urban environment, in buildings that were 7, 8, 9 stories high, with loads of debris and rubble. And amongst this, we found fallen ISIS fighters wearing suicide belts. We found all those different complex devices that I was talking about before, making it very difficult for us, and also costly, and at a high risk to clear all of those devices. And as I described before, they can basically look like anything nowadays. We found dolls, we found, they used cooking pots to store the explosives in, we found storage facilities for the different electronic components that were used. So a multitude of different devices and types of devices. So in terms of how we responded to this, because it was not only Mosul, obviously, it was across the liberated area. And we focused on the liberated areas initially, and especially Mosul, Ramadi, Anbar, Saladin, Kirkuk, Fallujah, and Sinjar. We will very soon be extending our operations also to the southern governorates, but for the first 3.5 years, at least when I was in Iraq, and still am in Iraq, but we focused on the liberated areas. And we do this through 3 different pillars of work. One is technical support, where we are providing support to the national structures in place. There are 2 national mine action authorities. There is one in Baghdad for federal Iraq and one in the Kurdish region. And we provide them with training and technical advice to enable them to autonomously, without our support, in a couple of years, operate themselves and to deal with this threat that is relatively new. There's a lot of experience in Iraq from clearing landmines, but this threat, specifically the improvised explosive devices, that's new. Explosive hazard management is the next one, number 2, where we do clearance. And before we do clearance, we do survey. We map the areas where there is contamination, and then we deploy clearance teams, typically high-risk searchers, battle area clearance, mechanical assets sometimes to deal with the debris, and we clear the different types of ammunition. And in doing this, I should mention, we've done over 1,600 sites with critical infrastructure, so ranging from hospitals, schools, bridges, water treatment plants, power plants, etc. And the last one, but not least important, is risk education. Through our explosive ordnance risk education, we provide exposed and contaminated communities, returnees, and the international community, also humanitarian community and humanitarian workers, with life-saving messages so that they know how to identify, how to report, and how to avoid exposure from explosive objects. So technical support, I talked about what has been important in Iraq, and one thing we very soon experienced was that it was not enough to just do training. We also needed to embed staff, technical staff, with the different parts of the government. So that does not only include the national mine action structures, but also places like the Joint Coordination and Monitoring Center under the Prime Minister's office. And we also identified that we needed to deliver training for police and the Ministry of Interior. And that has been one of our flagships, really, where we have delivered something we call explosive hazard first responder training. We've done this for hundreds of local police women and police men who, as part of the rest of their police training, they get a week's training on how to identify explosive hazards, how to warn, and how to report explosive hazards. And then they go back to their police stations and they have this additional skill set. Explosive hazard management, we've surveyed over 219 million square meters. We cleared close to 60,000 pieces of explosive ordnance, including almost 4,000 improvised explosive devices. And as I said, our activities have really been focused on this from inception. And what is important also in Iraq is that mine action is an enabler, because without UNMAS Iraq and all the work that we have done in support of, in particular, stabilization, UNDP would not have been able to restore and rehabilitate all this critical infrastructure, the 1,600 sites that I spoke about. Risk education, life-saving messages, we deliver to Iraqi population, we deliver to humanitarian workers. We do this through workshops, we do it through risk education sessions, we do it through school risk education sessions. And so far we've delivered life-saving messages to more than 1.2 million people. What is also very different in Iraq, and Iraq is different for many, many reasons. When it comes to really, and I keep on saying that, you know, I'm 50 years old and every day is in Iraq. And it really still is. And Iraq is complex, but it also gives and allows for a lot of opportunities. And you can see one of them up there with the virtual reality goggles that we use for training. Another opportunity when it comes to risk education has been the possibility of using smartphones and using films, etc. Everyone's got a smartphone, and we have had a massive reach for risk education also through Facebook and various communications campaigns. In terms of operational footprint, where we are working, I know it's difficult to see, but mainly we have our operations right now. We're about to expand, but in Anbar, in Nineveh, and in particular in Sinjar, Tel Afar, Nineveh Plains, Mosul, we are deploying capacity in as well. And in Anbar, you can see Ramadi and Fallujah. And this is capacity that is EHM, so explosive hazard management, survey and clearance. You can see mechanical assets, it's risk education, and also what's called the CL, which is community liaison. It's basically talking to people and finding out where the explosive hazards are so that we in a later stage can carry out clearance. Obviously, we would like to do much more than this, and we will, with a grant from or funding from the EU later in the year, or early next year, commence operations also in southern Iraq. And I actually have a team right now in Basra doing a reconnaissance for this purpose. So talking about southern Iraq, the most mine and explosive remnants of war contaminated regions in Iraq are the governorates of Basra, Misan, and Mutana, and that is in the south. And in these areas, it's been confirmed that 1.5 billion square meters remain hazardous in the south. And 970 million square meters are minefields. And this is mainly from the two Gulf Wars. We've been asked several times to support in the south. Until now, we've been focusing on the liberated areas, but now with this additional funding, we will have the opportunity to start operations also in the south. And I'm hopeful that this will also lead to additional funding, possibly from Sweden, maybe, for southern Sweden as well. And we believe that 2/3 of the minefields can be reduced as not being hazardous through survey interventions. And through doing this, we can allow for the government of Iraq can allow for people to utilize the land for building homes and to extend agricultural areas. As Fadwa said, mine action and what we do in Iraq, it's not only clearance and survey, risk education. Important also, in particular for me being Swedish, who's been brought up with this, and always consider gender as extremely important throughout my career. It's been important to incorporate gender mainstreaming in all our activities. And this we have done in different ways, supporting the national mine action authorities with gender mainstreaming and women's empowerment within our technical support. We do it through having teams that are mixed, men and women working together, which also gives unique access to communities. If you send a team to a community that is just consisting of men, you will not in Iraq get access to all parts of that community. So it's important to mix. And we also incorporate gender mainstreaming and gender considerations in all our internal and external processes for recruitment, the development of the country strategy, etc. Advocacy forms another important part where we also incorporate and consider gender mainstreaming, and we are part of the Gender Task Force and the International Gender Group. We are also advocating for gender mainstreaming in mine action within the different international and UN processes and reports. We have made a number of stories. We have a video on women in mine action highlighting the roles of a female in mine action. We have a digital story available on how we are breaking gender barriers in Iraq. And 3 years in a row now, we have been celebrating the International Women's Day in Baghdad, but focusing on gender mainstreaming in mine action. So how does it work with funding in Iraq? Over the last 3 years, we've had 20 donors. We have a programmatic approach with several donors providing funding towards our activities in Iraq. We are completely funded through bilateral contributions through the Voluntary Trust Fund. We have been, as I stated in the beginning, been supporting the UNDP and Government of Iraq stabilization efforts, but we've done this with funds and resources that we have raised individually. We have not had any funding from UNDP to do this. So we've raised all the funds ourselves to do this and to allow us to survey and clear these, the 1,600 different stabilization priorities. So what are the challenges? Iraq is full of challenges, and in January, February this year, and other one was added to the list, of course, COVID-19, which has hampered our operations. It hasn't stopped them. We stopped for a while in March, but could quickly in April resume operations again in Anbar. And we now have an operational, almost full operational footprint up and running. Security situation, I'm sure that you follow the news. You would have seen that as late as yesterday, there was a rocket attack on Baghdad International Airport. The US is talking about leaving Baghdad, the diplomatic mission, and the US embassy closing down. We will see where that ends, but security is constantly an issue. Lack of political stability in the central government is another one. We see ministers coming and going. And it's extremely important for me and my team to maintain and ensure that we have a good collaboration with the government, no matter who's in power, whether it's a minister or a director general. We also see a very fluent and uncertain leadership within the two national mine action structures, which makes our work more difficult. It is difficult to sustain funding at the required level. We've seen over the last year that Iraq is no longer the flavor of the month for some of our donors, unfortunately. And from having close to or over $70 million for 2 years in a row, we now see less funding. And new funding is typically for a year, but what we really need is a firm commitment for a longer period. We're now introducing a model where we are issuing grants to international NGOs, teaming up with national non-governmental organizations. And for this to be sustainable, we need funding that goes beyond a year. Right now, we're focusing on nationalization of a sustainable mine action response, so enabling the national organizations to work autonomously and nationally owned and without international technical oversight. We will continue with technical support to the national mine action authorities, and we are expanding, as I already said, our operations to southern Iraq. Here I was going to show a film, but I do realize that I've been talking for quite a while. So I'm also happy to skip that, and we can provide the link on YouTube, and I'm willing to take any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pehr. That was super interesting. We're a little bit short of time, but now it's time for our youth ambassadors, Anita and Hamza, actually, to ask their questions. So I think I'm going to let them in to ask their questions. And then again, if you have questions to Pehr and Fadwa, write them in the chat, and we'll see if we have some time in the end, or maybe we can extend the webinar a couple of minutes. So yes, it's time for Anita and Hamza, and they're going to talk a little bit about how they work to raise awareness to mine action and also ask a question. So maybe Anita, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that presentation. That was really interesting, actually. So in my association down in Jönköping, we have worked quite a lot with the Swedish UNA's project Mines. And mostly I would say we have worked with trying to raise awareness on the topic, because we have noticed quite a big lack of information and knowledge amongst people on the topic, like at all. And it seems like a bit like the question has slipped out of the public eye in the Swedish debate. So we're trying to work a lot with raising awareness and trying to make people engage more. So on that topic, I would like to ask a question to both of you, maybe, because I read a report by Landmine Monitor, and they were mentioning that there has been a very large increase in the number of people killed or injured by mines. And I'm just wondering, what do you guys think is the reason behind this? And can we expect a further increase or risk of further increase in the future?
Ladies first, Fadwa.
Thank you, Pehr and Anita. I think one of the reasons why there might be an increase of accidents due to landmines is something that you have mentioned a bit, Anita, is people forgetting or about this issue, but also, and something that I would give my colleague Pehr the floor to discuss a bit further if he agrees on that, is the fact that landmines have been used more and more in components of other form of explosive, and particularly in IEDs. And it's a bit it's something that it's very new in our sector, so I cannot speak so much about it at this point, or speculate too much about the reasons, but I think that is one of the areas that could be explored in the future. Pehr, your turn.
Thank you, Fadwa. Yeah, I agree with what Fadwa said, and it really is something that we see very clear in Iraq as well. And I think what we also need to remember, and maybe to be very honest here, I think that it's important also that the affected states, and I'm talking more about Iraq now than other states, but that they also contribute, and that they don't only contribute through coordination and in some cases with military assets carrying out clearance, but also through financial means. And I think at least in Iraq, we try to encourage the government of Iraq, remembering and bearing in mind that the government of Iraq and Iraq as a state is a middle-income country. They're not poor, should be in a position to provide funding through a transparent mechanism, such as the UNMAS Voluntary Trust Fund for clearance activities. And I think when affected states can do this, they will also encourage long-standing donors to follow, and that's the signal that I get from donors, that they want to see this, and if states are doing this, they will follow with more funding. And I think that is an important aspect of this as well.
Thank you, Pehr. That was the end of your answer, right?
Correct, over.
Yeah, over. Good. So with that, I think we're gonna let Hamza in. There you are, Hamza. So please talk a little bit about how you raise awareness to mine action, and then feel free to ask a question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks to Pehr and Fadwa for a very interesting presentation. I first became interested in the landmine issue when I went to the UNAB course on peace and security, December 2018. There we were introduced to the UN project, MINUD, which support the the UNMAS work. I then realized the fact that landmines were the death itself, planted on our ground, injuring and killing thousands of children, men and women annually. I understood the huge importance of mine clearance done by local people and supported by the UN, which allowed people and communities to flourish and put the wars where they belong in the first hand in history. As a youth ambassador lecturing on global goals, I try often to include the work done by UNMAS to raise awareness for the whole thing, the whole mining thing, but also I'm active in my home city in Uddevalla, and I'm planning to do some kind of activity to which is like related to the mine issue, which would help raise also the awareness and get the young people more engaged. My question to both of you actually is, you know, when you see Donald Trump saying that he is like planning to work and to raise and having more landmines, how can we like assure a global mine ban and that the 164 states which are complying with the Man Ban Treaty are really complying with it? Thank you.
You're asking a very difficult question, Hamza, at least for me to answer. I think maybe one country may be wanting to move away from the Man Ban Treaty as it is right now, but it doesn't mean that the rest of the world is interested in doing that. At least, definitely for DRC, it's something that they want to. It's a goal they have, and they're really hoping to be able to be mine free by the end of 2021. And these discussions that the President Trump may or statements he may make is not affecting their desire to make their country free of landmines. Over to you, Pehr.
Thank you. And again, I will echo Fadwa. That's a very difficult question you're asking, Hamza. But let me first start by thanking you for your initiative and your work in raising awareness. I think that is very important, and that it comes from your level and upwards is also important. So again, thank you very much. I think that is part of my answer also, that we need to keep this current. We need to continue to raise the awareness about the problems. I mean, sessions like today are very useful in raising the awareness amongst people. You will all walk away with an idea about contamination in Iraq and Congo, and hopefully talk with other people later on today about it and in the coming week. So that is important. But also for programs like the 19 UNMAS programs, through strategic communications, continue to keep donors alike aware of what we're doing and what we're achieving with the money. And also, like I said in my last statement, that states will have to contribute to achieve this. And I can hold my hand up and say that I'm very dubious that Iraq will actually achieve their commitments under the convention in a timely fashion. Given the level of contamination, given the uncertainty in terms of funding streams, governmental allocations, the security situation, and now COVID on that. And I think we need to expect that some of the state parties to the convention will have to seek further extensions as they not manage to meet the obligations, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Pehr. Thank you for that answer. We're almost at 4 o'clock. Jens, is there any questions in the chat or that you want to pose, or?
No, I must say that you have had we have heard two very crisp, clear presentations from Fadwa and Pehr. and I guess that's why we haven't gotten so many questions. But as we have written in the chat, if anybody has a specific question on how many countries who are parties to the Ottawa Treaty or something like that, please just send me an email. And if it is more specifically, you can also email to Pehr. You have our email addresses in the chat. Otherwise, I'm just very happy and grateful that we got such good presentations, and generally that UNMAS has been helpful in using our small gifts to do good in DRC and in other countries.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And now we have Fadwa's email address in the chat as well.
Perfect. Yeah, so everyone that has participated, feel free to email us if you have more questions, both us at UNA Sweden. I can write my email as well, and also to Fadwa and Pehr. So maybe then it's 4 o'clock, so maybe we will end here. So thank you everyone that has participated, and hope you learned some new things. And thank you again to Fadwa and Pehr for participating here with us today. All right, bye bye.
Thank you very much. Tack så mycket. Hej då. Heja Sverige.
Thank you. Bye bye.